The release of the movie Airplane on July 2nd, 1980, was something of a comedic revolution. It isn't like this was the first mega-hit parody film. The previous decade had seen a slew of big spoof successes by the likes of Monty Python, Mel Brooks, and Woody Allen. But these movies were all based around the comedic personas of their stars/creators. The settings of these stories, be they the future, King Arthur's court, or Frankenstein's castle, typically just provided a set of objects and tropes upon which a comedian riffed, knowingly. But for the characters in Airplane, it's almost as if the concept of jokes themselves doesn't exist, and no behavior ever strikes anyone as odd at all. In fact, in a way, the only central absurdity the movie points out is that movies have tropes. This is a rare comedy film with no real stars. Here, it's the style of humor that takes center stage, goofily permeating every element of the film from background sight gags to recurring character bits. Flowing from its trio of writer-directors, the two Zucker brothers, Jerry and David, and their collaborator, Jim Abrams, collectively known by their acronym ZAZ, the three had built their comedic formula working together for years in their Kentucky Fried Theater stage show, honing their specific brand of humor and forging rigorous rules for how their jokes were supposed to land. The cast of Airplane, largely B-grade ultra-serious actors, were there almost to be paper dolls upon which Zaz hung funny punchlines delivered with deadpan seriousness, and the screenplay functioned in the same fashion, having been ripped off quite brazenly from a 1957 airplane thriller called 0 Hour, this theft perpetrated with zero compunction. There is a quality of the uncanniness of life itself that Airplane points out, and for a generation of humorists, particularly dad humorists who had their lives altered by watching it, it would prove difficult for many of them to ever take anything seriously again.
Welcome to Kale Your Idols, a new Hollywood podcast with your hosts,
Sam Ludwig
and Elena Gibson. This is a podcast about film. Primarily, we discuss movies, directors, actors, and writers known for their work during the new Hollywood era of studio filmmaking that began in 1967 with Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate, and pretty much ended in the early 80s with One from the Heart and Heaven's Gate. In this episode, we are discussing the groundbreaking comedy classic, Airplane. Sam, I have a question for you. Would you ever choose to eat fish on an airplane?
I don't know when the last time I was actually served an airplane meal was. Like, is that a thing that is just really reserved now only for long flights or flights that are overnight? The short answer is no, I would never get fish on an airplane. But does it even exist?
Yeah, if you like fly international, if the flight's long enough, they'll still give you food. Fucking bullshit that they don't give it to us on our 5.5-hour cross-country flights from the West Coast to East Coast. That's stupid and makes me angry. But I remember going to like Hong Kong a couple of years ago, and they'll feed you for a long flight like that. But yeah, you could not pay me to eat fish on an airplane. And I wonder if that's because of this movie Airplane. Like, I wonder if people's reluctance to eat fish, if they're not like totally sure of its quality, if that like really stems mostly from Airplane.
Oh, you mean like you think that this movie has had an impact on fish eating even outside of the airplane context?
Definitely within the airplane context. Like, I know actually it is a real thing that the current practice is that the co-pilot and the main pilot do not eat the same meal. And I think that's very funny. But I wouldn't be surprised if they never serve fish on an airplane because of this movie. But I do wonder how much it's impacted, in general, anxiety around eating fish.
Yeah, that is really crazy that they wouldn't have thought of that in the first place. If you have the idea of we need to have two pilots, like we need to already have a co-pilot. But this has been something that's been with air travel since it was commercially available. Like, you must have had somebody getting sick off of some airline food fairly early on. Like, can't they bring their own food or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I was reading this one article where they were talking about how pilots do you kind of have to play it safe when they're choosing what to eat before flight? But if that's your full-time job, if you're just nonstop flying, like you're gonna want to eat fun foods every now and then. It just seems kind of stressful. I would never want a job that's like so high pressure that if you get sick, everybody could potentially die.
But now it's not even like a thing anymore, right? Like the autopilot can just land a plane now. We kind of don't even need pilots at all or co-pilots.
That's what they say. And yet, there's all these plane crashes right now.
No, but supposedly, the rehearsal posits that it's because you have weird communication problems between the pilot and the co-pilot.
It's kind of funny that we're doing this episode in the midst of all this airplane anxiety. So, I'm sorry to anybody who listens to this episode and gets a little triggered from flying. I know it's a scary time to fly right now. But yeah, we're doing the episode anyways.
Yeah, and we're doing an episode. This is kind of something where I feel like we should let you in on this. This is another episode we're sort of dragging our feet on after. So Saturday Night Fever was our last episode, and both of us were kind of downers about that, or we just don't like that movie. And Airplane is a movie that we were looking for a pick-me-up from that vibe. How would you say we did as far as choosing the right movie for that?
While we were watching Airplane, we were both going into it really being ready to embrace the humor. I personally knew that I didn't like this movie that much to begin with, but I was really, really willing to give it a chance. And as we were watching it, we both kind of chuckled in the beginning at some parts. And then halfway through, we were just so stony-faced throughout the whole thing. So I don't think it really worked as a pick-me-up for us. But, it's not interesting to just listen to two people talk about how a movie's not funny. That's just not interesting. So I personally am going to try and approach this episode of just, bringing up the context surrounding it and the influence this movie had on comedy in general. And just really trying to talk about the movie outside of the fact that I don't think it's funny at all.
Well, it's different because I want to say right away that I still think, even though I didn't find this movie funny, and it's strange to say this because this movie's only intention is to make you laugh every second of its runtime, and yet I still like this movie a lot more than Saturday Night Fever. It's not even like I can say for sure that these jokes don't hold up, because I actually was watching a lot of reaction videos of people watching Airplane for the first time now, and it seems like they really do still hit for a lot of people. So it's also kind of hard to say because I know the beats of the film so well. It's hard for me to fully know if it's not working on me because I have such familiarness with it, and also we watched it, as is often the case, like at the end of watching other movies that it's parodying / ripped off directly in a way that's kind of annoying. Like 0 Hour and Airport 75. These are both just very similar movies. I think all of these airplane disaster movies have a lot of structural problems, particularly in the third act. And so I was like really bored of the format of the movie, and the movie was kind of annoying me in ways. But at the same time, I still think that like these jokes exist almost as there's a purity of the moments, even if it's not making me laugh. I'm sort of still appreciating it. I basically didn't hate this movie like I hated Saturday Night Fever. That's what I'm getting.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. I personally think that this movie, even though it's not one of my favorites, I still think it is a comedy classic. And I also feel like it suffers a little bit from that thing that happens, with Shakespeare, where people, like young people, will read Shakespeare plays and they'll be like, oh, that's so cliche, without realizing that Shakespeare is the thing that created the cliche to begin with. And I think that's also true for Airplane. A lot of these jokes might seem a little like, okay, that's stupid, or we've seen that before, or whatever. But Airplane really was so groundbreaking with its comedy style. And that is certainly lost on me as a modern day viewer. The big thing about Airplane is they chose to cast straight actors, like not comedians. They actively did not want comedians. The studio wanted them to cast somebody like Chevy Chase or Bill Murray. And the studio thought, like, this is good that we're suggesting these guys. Like, we're saying we are willing to pay a bunch of money to get these stars in your movie. So Paramount thought they're paying the ZAZ team a compliment by suggesting these comedians. But they were like, no, we want straight actors. We're going for deadpan delivery. We want the actors to not act as if they're in a comedy. And that is the thing that's so different about Airplane versus other comedies at the time. Like in Young Frankenstein, when they deliver the jokes, it is with like a knowing wink to the audience.
Or like a wonderful performance. Like Gene Wilder getting, it's a great character joke, the whole, don't call me Frankenstein, I'm Frankenstein. But he's playing the joke, how overcranked he is about this thing that he's being too sensitive. There's no part of the joke that you're like unclear on what's supposed to be funny, but almost everybody talked about not getting this script when they read it on the page. If you just see like a pilot saying, well, Billy, do you like movies about gladiators? What is funny about that? I mean, I think it's this thing of nobody really made a movie making fun of how serious old-fashioned movie acting was. I guess we should just say right now, so this script is like ripped off from a movie called 0 Hour. What do you think about that?
Yeah, the ZAZ team, which is the Zucker brothers and Jim Abrams, they were recording late night TV to try and find funny commercials that would play, like the ridiculous commercials. And they had this theater called Kentucky Fried Theater, and they were trying to find content to create skits around it. And they accidentally recorded 0 Hour, and they watched it, and they loved it. And they thought it was a fun film, and they also thought it was like a perfectly structured film, like in a classical sense. And they loved it, and they were inspired by it and decided to make a parody of it. They wrote a script, sent it to their friend John Landis, and Landis was like, guys, this isn't parody, it's plagiarism. So they were like, okay, we need to call this movie technically a remake rather than a parody. And so then they bought the rights to do a remake of 0 Hour, and they bought the rights for $2,500 because it was an obscure movie from the 50s. And that's how they were able to make this movie. And truly, when you watch 0 Hour, it is shocking how much is just directly pulled from 0 Hour that's in Airplane. Like the line, like, we need to find somebody who can fly this plane and who didn't have fish for dinner. That is like verbatim from 0 Hour.
We're going to have to take a second to talk about this because this is really weird and it totally affects the way that you view Airplane. Anybody who likes this movie who then watches 0 Hour, it kind of kills Airplane a little bit for you, I think. Like, I've heard other people have this experience because it's still not a thing that, I mean, it's a very obscure movie. Most people do not come across 0 Hour. But when I tell you that this is, not only is it lines, it's every plot element. There is a doctor, and like they're like, the woman says, I think the man next to me is a doctor. It's the same exchange. It's just then in the Airplane movie, the joke is that he's got a stethoscope around his neck, and that is actually funny. But no, yeah, we've got to find somebody who can fly this plane, not only can fly this plane, but who didn't have fish for dinner, because fish for dinner is the thing that causes everybody to have food poisoning. The main guy had a traumatic experience flying in the war. The whole movie occurs in exactly the same way, and they have lines that they clearly typed up from the script. Now, what they talk about when they say they watched 0 Hour, they liken it to Jonas Salk discovering the polio vaccine. They describe watching this movie like a revelation to them. I can't remember if it was Jim Abrams, I think, said, when I heard him say, we need to find someone on this plane who not only can fly it, but who didn't have fish for dinner, it was like his mind getting cracked open and suddenly he understood all of these possibilities. But it's like, that's just a line from a movie that was good. Like, hadn't you seen movies before? Like, I know that they were recording this ostensibly for the commercials and we're not even thinking about watching movies, but it was as if this idea of something that somebody says being funny was a purely fresh and new idea for them, and that they all suddenly got this thing that they could do, which was just steal these lines and put them in another movie. And yet they also were clearly correct about this unlocking something and there being something weird here that they're getting from it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand what it was that they realized, but they did get something. And maybe more people should steal stuff, but it really just kind of ruined the movie. I don't know.
Yeah, they said that when they watched 0 Hour, they felt like it was a perfect script in a classical sense, just the way it was structured. That really helped them because then they didn't have to write their own movie. They could just use... Like, they described the movie 0 Hour as the Christmas tree, and then all their jokes are the ornaments that they hang on the Christmas tree. And the thing, though, is that I don't really trust their judgment about what a perfect script is, because when they first wanted to make a movie, they approached John Landis, and they were like, we want to make a movie. And he's like, okay, great, do you have a screenplay? And they were like, what's that? So they're not exactly experts when it comes to movie making. But again, like you said, like, Airplane was a huge success. a lot of people really, really loved it. So they must have been right.
But it's like, for example, the whole pilot being a pedophile joke. That just arises from a hilariously held on look in Zero Hour between the little boy and the pilot. They just kind of look and nod at each other smilingly for too long. And if you watch this movie a million times, I guess you extrapolate, we should, develop this creepy relationship. But then there's other things like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking, escalating to other, I picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue. That's funny, but you want them to have been inspired by this being a trope or something. You want that line, that concept of the person who's stressed, and you want that to be from their cumulative understanding of genre and different movies. But no, like that character just says, I picked the wrong week to quit smoking in Zero Hour, and then they get jokes out of it. But it's like it's so cheap in a way once you find out that they did. But again, maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe I'm missing the forest for the trees here. I don't think so, though. Like, I think it's just kind of the kind of thing that could only work with a really obscure movie and only once, really.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean, that if this is supposed to be a parody of how people act during disaster films, then the jokes, I would want them to be based on those concepts. And it does seem like what they did is they read the script, they'd pick a line, and then they'd make jokes up off of that very specific line, totally out of context of the rest of the script. Like, it wasn't, like, I felt like they weren't even thinking about the rest of the movie each time they would come up with a joke for each line that they're focusing on. And I think an example of this is in Zero Hour, the stewardess is asking the doctor, this is crazy that everybody's getting so sick from food poisoning. Like, what is this that's making them so sick to this point, like where it's life-threatening? That doesn't make sense. And the doctor gives some bullshit answer, but then he's like, but that's not important right now. And so he just like writes it off. And to me, I'm not funny, I'm not a comedian, but I would think that you would make a joke about somebody like brushing off the bad logic of the film. Like, that to me is where you would start with writing your joke. But instead, the actual joke they wrote is just so literal, where somebody's like, a hospital, what is it? And he's like, a big building with patients, but that's not important right now. Like, that is not how I would write that joke. But also, I'm not a comedian. Anything I would write would be terrible and not funny. So, they clearly knew what was best, I guess. But it's just not what I would expect for parody humor.
Well, right, because it's not really quite parodying these disaster movies. It's parodying the existence of language being weird, the English language. Like, so many of these jokes, and this is the central kind of joke that I don't like in this movie, and I forgot how much of it is somebody taking something literally. It's a big building with patients, notwithstanding, which I do think that's a very funny way of describing a hospital, a big building with patients. He, at one point, Ted Stryker asks to get a ticket, and they say smoking or non, and he says smoking. And so she hands him a ticket that is smoking. The ticket is smoking. And I just want to shout at the screen, that's not funny. But like that, I guess I'm wrong here, but so many of these things are like this. They all of the instruments joke, and they cut back to them playing instruments. That's not funny. Like, come on.
Yeah, that one, that bothers me a lot because they say, oh, they can't land the plane, they're on instruments, and then they cut back. And it's like, is that even how you would say it? They're on instruments? Like, that one's just like worded weirdly to me. But anyways, one that did make me chuckle, that is just a literal interpretation joke, is when they're calling the guy from the Mayo Clinic, and he's just on the phone, and there's just a whole bunch of jars of mayo in the background. And that one to me is funny because the joke is in the background, they don't draw attention to it, and if you happen to notice it, then you're suddenly like, oh, right, it's Mayo Clinic. Like, that one actually made me laugh, even though it's stupid.
Then it ends on, all right, give me ham on 5, hold the mayo. And that line always stuck in my head. I think even as a kid, I was like, that was too reverse engineered from this set of the 2 phone calls. But
yeah, but I do think we should point out this background thing. They were really inspired by Mad Magazine. And one of the things they learned from Mad Magazine is that Mad Magazine would have a joke in the foreground of the panel and then another joke going on in the background or also in the margins. And that really influenced their style. So they really did like this idea of having jokes going on in the background. They learned through Airplane that one of the really important things is that the joke in the background has to connect to what's going on in the foreground. Like, they always, like, they realized that the part in the airplane where a spear comes crashing into the control room or a watermelon falls on the table, those two jokes never get any laughs by audiences. And they realize it's because that random stuff happening in the background is way too disconnected from the movie. And so ever since the experience of that with Airplane, all of their jokes moving forward in their future works, the foreground and the background jokes were always connected.
Okay, so this movie like blew people's minds. It changed. We both listened to this oral history of the movie Airplane.
Called Shirley, You Can't Be Serious, The True Story of Airplane.
Yes. And by the way, just oral histories in general. That's what a lazy way to write a book. You just take a bunch of interviews and then put them together in order in the order of events. I'm sorry, but I just like, because anybody even really wanting me to take credit for writing those books, but whatever. Get your bag. This movie was revolutionary to a whole generation of comedians, because I do think that there's a certain thing about the Woody Allen or Mel Brooks or Monty Python parody that's so specific to the style of those comedians that you don't really see. There's no real way for like the person to talk back or be a part of that world, right? Like nobody watches a Woody Allen movie and is like, I belong in this Woody Allen movie, or like this is like the kind of joke that I would make to my friends. Monty Python, the ways that people make those jokes are just repeating them, literally like with this like British affect. There's a certain alienness to it, but Airplane has this quality, I think, that for a lot of people, it's a world that you live in. And it's just things being funny. And it sort of like makes you notice that things are funny. Yeah, I mean, it changed people's lives. As we say, we didn't really respond to it. But the more that any of these like comics who I respect in this oral history talk about it, the more that it does make me appreciate the movie on a level that sort of makes me sad sometimes. Like, because Bill Hader at one point talks about, like, if you watch Airplane and you're not laughing, I know we can never hang out. And I'm like, oh man, I guess Bill Hader never wants to hang out with me. I think it's funny. I get it,
Yeah, the South Park creators, Matt and Trey, said that they were heavily inspired by the tone of Airplane. And they were inspired by that and decided to incorporate it into their own work. But the big difference for them is they wanted to make sure all their jokes made sense. Whereas the ZAZ team for Airplane, they would put in absurdist humor that didn't really make sense within the world of the film. And so, yeah, I had a similar experience where Airplane to me wasn't that funny. But then hearing people like Sarah Silverman and Bill Hader and Matt and Trey and all these people talk about how insanely influential it was for them as comedians. And it did bring about a lot of comedy that I sort of think is funny. I'm not actually a South Park fan or a fan of Sarah Silverman, but still I recognize that they are good comedians.
But it's like, if you like South Park, and Trey Parker talks about like the kind of jokes that he liked as a kid, that he was seeing Airplane as a small child, and he was repeating like, you ever seen a grown man naked? And or Billy, do you like gladiator movies? And he didn't know what these jokes meant. It was just the sort of the way that they were being said that was funny. And I think you can see that influence in South Park and like, I'm not your buddy guy. I'm not your guy, friend. But yeah, obviously like Airplane has no center. Airplane has no perspective. It's just this palette that it stays within. And the palette is kind of broad in a way, like because it's got three different people's sensibilities, but they've all figured out what they agree on that they think is funny. I feel like when I first saw Airplane, I thought it was very funny. It's very hard for me to know, though, because I know I watched it with my dad, and I'm sure that I was probably just kind of watching him to see where he was laughing. I also, I remember the lines in Airplane, and I think about them, and I think they're funny. I just think that this is a movie that people almost, it's kind of similar to Saturday Night Fever. I don't know how often people watch it and really go back to it. And like, I think they're just a lot, this movie exists in the memories of a lot of dads, really. And I just don't know if they actually went back, if it would have the impact that they're imagining it would. I think a lot of the famous bits still play, but they don't. I don't know if they have this power that I feel like I remembered them having. They feel a little flatter in a strange way.
I think any comedy film, if you watch it too many times, it's just always going to feel flat compared to the first couple times you watch it. I just think that's always the case.
Not Blazing Saddles for me.
Okay, well, most of them. I think that is kind of the nature of comedy. But I just also have a question. What do you think about the approach of shoving in as many jokes as possible and playing the statistics game? Like you said, there are big moments that still hit, even if you think they don't hit quite as much as you remember. There are these jokes that are always funny, like "Don't call me Shirley," and the people lining up to beat up the hysterical woman. The boobs on screen, always funny.
But that's less funny than an interesting artistic choice.
I think it's funny. And the do you like movies about gladiators, that kind of thing. Very funny. How do you feel, though, about the type of movie where they throw in a bunch of other jokes that aren't as funny? Does the experience of sitting and not laughing through jokes that don't hit for you, does that take away from when a joke actually hits? Because I think I personally would rather less jokes and all of them be better quality than just a bunch of jokes nonstop and only 15% of them make me laugh.
I think that when Airplane is invoked now, that is the collective assumption, is it's filled with jokes. I'm sure some of them don't hit as well anymore, but I bet there's still a huge ratio of ones that do. That is just wrong. This movie goes long stretches with jokes that it's not even that they're not hitting. They just don't. They feel very low effort. Somebody turns on air in the airplane and it just blasts their face with too much air. Is that a joke even? The joke is just a thing happened a little bit more extremely than you would have assumed. But then why isn't everything happening more extremely? Like, it's strange because oftentimes when you have a Woody Allen, like Love and Death or whatever, it's sort of like everybody else is taking the world seriously and he's cracking jokes and pointing out how absurd everything is. In Airplane, the characters are all just existing in a purely serious story, a kind of a boring story, especially if you've seen other versions of it so recently. But they're just existing in a purely straight story, and then a totally unrelated thing is also happening to occur. The jokes that I like in Airplane are the old lady commenting on Julie Haggerty's body when she's like, "Oh, she's lovely. Firm, supple breasts." It's like that's a sort of joke that I like. The characters that have a bit, that usually works well. Like the entirety of the cockpit sequence to me is all very like every character has a very specific comedic game that I think plays very well, and we can talk about that. But like Leslie Nielsen obviously is sort of the breakout star of this, somewhat inadvertently you could say. But like, what is the comedic game of the Doctor? I don't. Is there any? Like, he's a little bit more absurd than the pilot is, but he's mostly just being like a doctor. Like, there's no joke. Like, he doesn't have a bit.
Yeah, and again, I think that has to do with their approach, where I felt like they just developed the jokes by looking line by line and trying to develop a joke just based off of that single isolated line, rather than developing like a running gag throughout the entire film based on a certain trope that they're making fun of. Do you want to talk a bit about Leslie Nielsen?
Sure. I saw Airplane in the context of already completely knowing who Leslie Nielsen was, because Leslie Nielsen was one of the most famous people in my life in the 90s. I mean, how about you? Did you have a Leslie Nielsen? You were probably a little young.
Yeah, to be honest, when we were prepping to rewatch this movie to record this podcast, I tried to picture in my head who Leslie Nielsen was, and I didn't have a picture in my head. So I don't have familiarity with him. I know his name. That's it.
So you haven't seen Naked Gun or anything?
No.
Oh, well, we should watch those when we prep for the new Naked Gun movie, which kind of looks funny to me. At least they got me with that O.J. Simpson joke.
What's the O.J. Simpson joke?
In the trailer. You haven't seen it?
No.
Oh, it's great. Can we just watch it right now? Can I just show you that, how you react?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was funny. I did see that trailer. I just didn't get the joke because I didn't recognize that was O.J. Simpson in the trailer. Because, okay, O.J. Simpson's in one of the Naked Gun movies.
He's in all of them.
He's in all the Naked Gun movies. I remember, like, in the oral history book we were listening to, they were talking about...
They got in some great O.J. jokes in that.
I was getting so annoyed while listening to that book because they would make these jokes But they were clearly like written ahead of time and then spoken out loud as if they were thought up on the spot, but they weren't.
The way that these oral history books work, and it's actually kind of interesting, is I'm talking about these oral history audiobooks, right? So they interview all these people and they get these quotes, and then they re-invite the people back to record their quotes for the audiobook. I don't even know why they want to do it this way, but and then you get people like, so they have Matt and Trey and Bill Hader and Sarah Silverman acting their quotes correctly. But then they have Zaz in, they're attempting to recreate their repartee back and forth, but it's off.
Yeah, usually it just made me want to punch something. I just thought it was deeply unfunny. But there was one joke that actually made me laugh. It was one of the Zucker brothers saying that O.J. Simpson, he acted similarly to how he murdered. He got away with it, but nobody really believed him. And that really made me laugh.
Yeah. No, and I didn't even think about the fact that the OJ casting, obviously, in Naked Gun is up like a play on the Kareem casting, which itself is a play on this ball player in the original 0 Hour, who's just kind of acting a little stiff, although he does have presence.
To spell that out a little bit more, if you haven't seen Airplane recently, there's a co-pilot.
Everybody knows this.
I'm saying it anyways. Okay, there's a co-pilot played by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, a famous basketball player, and yeah, the reason he's in there is because in 0 Hour, the co-pilot in that movie is played by a famous football player and hilariously can't act. And so they're making fun of the fact of casting athletes in these movies who can't act. And O.J. Simpson was in The Towering Inferno, so they're kind of building off of that type of thing as well.
All of the actors who later go on to be in Naked Gun, Leslie Nielsen, O.J. Simpson, and George Kennedy, they're all veterans of this disaster movie trend in the 70s, which is weird because, again, as we say, everybody thinks that Airplane's a parody of Airport, which it is, but they really were not thinking of it at all. Need we reiterate that they took the script line for line from a 1957 film that they were attempting to like model the movie, and they originally wanted this to be in black and white and were forced to make it in color to make it more like the current disaster movies. But yeah, there is this weird connection between the casting of these disaster movies and then later Naked Gun.
They were actually also thinking of just dubbing over the original 0 Hour and making jokes like What's Up Tiger Lily style. But then they decided to go for an actual film they make themselves.
Yeah, this is, again, sorry, this is a kind of a side note, but I do think is really interesting, something that we're just kind of pointing out things that they said in the oral history. But the color palette of Airplane is deliberately much drabber than they were advised towards, and they feel vindicated in this because it doesn't, to them, look as dated as it could. Like, when you look back at like airport movies of the 70s, there always is a lot more of a swinging touch to it. Like, they have those double-decker airplanes. Everybody looks a little bit more 70s, but they were going for a 1950s look and a drab color palette because they had it in their mind. They wanted it to be in black and white, but they couldn't. So inadvertently, they sort of invent the more preppy, drab 80s, but with the looks in Airplane. And also just kind of, it is strange just to note how much air travel looks very similar and has kind of remained the same for the last 50 years. Like, it looks the same now.
Their seats are just bigger with more space.
They get served meals.
Okay, we were talking about Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah.
Sam, can you give me a bit more information? Like, what was Leslie Nielsen known for, / was he a well-known person prior to Airplane?
He was a well-known actor. He'd been in a number of classic films, but he wasn't famous really at all. He's in Forbidden Planet, which is one of our favorite films, and he's in The Poseidon Adventure, which is a movie you just watched. Well, you have to understand with this casting, so they're casting like, the guy from Mission Impossible is the pilot, the TV show Mission Impossible is the pilot, and Robert Stack and Lloyd Bridges and Leslie Nielsen. These are people who at the time were known as these stiff B-grade leading man types. They really were a sort of like older style. This movie comes out in 1980, which is the end of the New Hollywood era. These guys are really parodying and thinking of a much earlier kind of TV actor, a guy who just sort of talks like this and has a very specific affect and doesn't ever deviate from that. Just says everything with a sort of seriousness that was meant to be taken as trustworthy by the public, but if you looked at it too closely, came to seem very ridiculous because it's so artificial. And yet people didn't think to parody it. What you have to understand that's so strange about this recontextualizing that they were trying to do with these actors is we don't have actors nowadays that you could do this with. There's no actors that are that self-serious in their presentation. This is just interesting to think about. For the new Naked Gun, they've cast Liam Neeson in the lead. He has the same initials as Leslie Nielsen, so that, I guess, is one thing that made them maybe think of it. But he had this turn 15 years ago of becoming an action guy, but is not, I don't think, thought of as like an obviously humorless actor in a general way. If you look back at his work pre-Taken, he's in Love Actually. We don't have any actors now that are totally untainted from ever being fun or funny in the way that these 50s and 60s actors like Robert Stack were. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, is Liam Neeson too funny for this Naked Gun idea?
I think it just really gets at how our portrayals of masculinity in film have changed over time, because we don't portray these like cowboy style, strong, silent types as much anymore. They're always more human and realistic with flaws and who can crack a smile. And yeah, we have moved away from those hyper masculine, strong, silent stereotypes, I think. Maybe, oh, yeah, that's so funny. The only one I could think of who has that like hyper masculine type is that guy from Parks and Rec. What's his name? But he is a comedian, so like that's like only in comedy.
Nick Offerman.
Yeah, Nick Offerman.
Interesting. Yeah,
but he's a comedian, so yeah.
I mean, I guess Jason Statham, right? If you got Jason Statham and somehow were able to put him in a comedy where that was actually funny, but just I could not imagine Jason Statham working in. I mean, Vin Diesel, like one of the Fast and the Furious guys.
Vin Diesel, I think, has some funniness to him. Yeah, yeah.
What do you think about Statham, though?
Don't know if I've seen a movie with him.
Come on, you know who Jason Statham is. Look him. You are a movie podcaster, Elena. Don't cop out to this. You know who Jason Statham is.
He's bald. He was in that bee movie recently, like the ones with the bees. Let me see if I've seen anything that he's been in.
But you know what he's like.
I don't know.
He's not like anything, is what I'm saying. Like, he's a serious guy. I guess Tom Cruise would be another one. Tom Cruise, but we've seen him be funny. I mean, it'd be like soap opera actors, but even them, there's a heightened humorous nature to it. It's just anybody gets that stuff can be made funny. And people didn't get that this shit could be funny back then. Like, they had to have a comedian who did an impression of Robert Stack do that impression of Robert Stack to explain to him how to be funny the way that Robert Stack was funny in The Fugitive. Like, they had him go, he's the big cheese, he's the man, and Robert Stack was just saying, like, he's the big cheese, he's the man. And they're like, no, you said it this funny way back then. And he's like, I was being serious.
Yeah, I think we've already, opened that can of worms and can't put those worms back in that can, or, I don't know, whatever metaphor is applicable in this scenario. Once it's been discovered in comedy, I think that's it. You can't do it again. I looked up Jason Statham, by the way, and I have...
Statham,
sorry. And I haven't seen a single movie he's been in.
I mean, I haven't really either.
It's just that's just not my style of film that I like to watch. Anyways, back to Leslie Nielsen. So, like all of these guys, when he was cast, it was considered an against type casting. But Leslie Nielsen said that he always felt like he's been cast against type up until this point. He always wanted to be a comedian. And in fact, when he read the script for Airplane, he told his agent, okay, don't tell them this, but I would pay to be in this movie. In that oral history book we listened to, they went on and on about how many pranks Nielsen would play on set. He was apparently obsessed with this fart machine, which I just want to say, back in those days, it was kind of like a homemade fart machine situation. They said it was like two baby food lids together that he would squeeze back and forth. And he would just wreak havoc on set with this fart machine. And he got a bunch of other fart machines to give to the other cast and crew. And he honestly sounded kind of really annoying. It's cute that he had so much fun, but I wonder how much they were just kind of humoring him. Like, yes, Leslie, very funny.
The fart machine stories are legion with Leslie Nielsen. It's the kind of thing where you hear, it's the second or third thing that any person ever mentions about Leslie Nielsen, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess he had a fart machine that he used sometimes. And it's like, no. He really didn't have a lot else going on. This was something he was doing constantly. And once he got famous, it was kind of his central bit that he would do on late night shows. It really does seem like this was his obsession. Do you find farts funny?
No, I don't.
I love how you put on your most humorless face for that.
I just don't think they're funny. I think it's lazy, dumb, stupid humor. I don't think they're funny. And that's it. Yeah.
But lazy, no, because there is an art to doing it well. And I have to shout out my friend Steve, who, maybe he doesn't want this to be public knowledge, but he used to be the fucking Botticelli of fart jokes because he would actually fart. But the whole bit with fart jokes done well, in my opinion, at least as practiced by Steve, was you wait. You just have to respond to a person saying something. Like, I just want to know, like, what time are we seeing this movie? I was thinking at o'clock. Or that's not even a good version of it, but it's like you have to do it in response to something when it's unexpected. And if you do that, then it's always funny to me. But just a fart happening unprovoked, I don't know if I would find in a moment of silence a fart happening funny.
Yeah. There are very, very few situations in which I would ever actually think it's funny.
I don't think I've ever found a fart joke in a movie funny. I guess I find it funny in Blazing Saddles, but that's the one time. And so why else would you ever need to do it? Which I don't think they have any fart jokes in Airplane.
Yeah, I think you're right. But, I said before that probably everybody on set was like, sure, Leslie, very funny. But clearly, like, the ZAZ guys were into fart jokes. When they were telling stories about when they were in college together, they would do fart joke humor all the time as, like, a bit in their, like, college bathrooms and stuff. So it's just not my style, not my scene.
Right. So Leslie Nielsen, again, sorry, just to get back to this. He is this incredibly famous person in the 90s. He was already famous to me before the movie Dracula Dead and Loving It came out, which I think that movie came out in 1996. And that was Mel Brooks sort of capitulating to the Zaz style, or I guess at that point it was just the Zucker brothers, because they had a split, and they've made so many movies between the three of them at this point. Look up their whole filmographies; it'll blow your mind.
Yeah, one of them directed Ghost. I forget which.
Yeah, I know. Right. But also terrible things, too. Like, one of them is, like, ultra conservative now, and he made, like, That American Carol. That's, like, Michael Moore seeing the ghosts of America Future and shit like that. One of them directed Scary Movie 3 and 4, not the first two. But Leslie Nielsen, when I was a kid, was just like, well, this is one of the funniest stars. Like, this is one of the great comedy stars. I was aware of Steve Martin, Adam Sandler, Robin Williams. And at that time in the 90s, it was like, well, those people are movie stars, and they're sometimes in comedies, and they're sometimes in more serious movies. And Leslie Nielsen is a pure comedy star. He is the star of a movie that has no basis in reality, that you're not really supposed to believe any second of. So, like, when I saw Airplane on TV with my dad, it was like, what? See who's coming? And it's like, oh, shit, Leslie Nielsen, fuck, he's going to kill it. So I didn't even have that experience of the revelatory new version of Leslie Nielsen. I was seeing Airplane as like, oh, I said, oh, this is where that started, I guess. And he's not that funny in the movie. Like, he's not as funny as he is in, like, Naked Gun.
Yeah, I have to say, I watched The Poseidon Adventure a couple days ago, and I thought that Leslie Nielsen was a lot funnier in that movie than in Airplane, even though he's not supposed to be. And that's clearly me considering him as a comedian now, and them making fun of the trope. They're making fun of his performance in The Poseidon Adventure in Airplane. That's all I can see when I watch The Poseidon Adventure and see him deliver his lines is that thing that they're making fun of. But yeah, I got to see The Naked Gun because I want to see him leaning in a little bit more to the comedy. But I think it's cool that he felt like he was miscast up until Airplane, and then he had a whole second life as an actor. Like, he was in a lot of stuff prior to Airplane, even though he wasn't a well-known actor. Like, when they cast him in Airplane, they're like, yeah, we're going to cast the guy from The Poseidon Adventure. What's his name? Like, they didn't know who he was. But it's cool that he was able to totally reinvent himself afterwards, so much so that people assumed he was always a comedian.
I think this is true of a lot of these guys, actually. Robert Stack and Lloyd Bridges, they both had much more comedic careers in their later life.
Barbara Billingsley, who's the mother from Leave It to Beaver, and she's the old white lady who translates the jive talk, said that Airplane was responsible for totally restarting her career. For a lot of these people, it did just revitalize them as actors. And that's cool.
Which is weird because this movie is just playing off them being these typecastable people who have been stuck in some weird persona for their whole life. It's not like this movie is trying to help anybody's career. It's just that it also was an incredibly popular movie and showcases its people well. Like, all of these people get an iconic bit that is going to be associated with them for the rest of their life.
do you like movies about gladiators? Which is funny because, like, that guy, Peter Graves, he's apparently really Christian. And he initially turned down the role because he said the script was the most disgusting piece of trash I've ever read in my life. And Zaz said, thank you. But they eventually convinced him to take the part. I heard one thing saying that he didn't really get the joke he was doing. And they said they really had to choreograph the line delivery of that scene very closely, where they were like, okay, you're going to look over to the right. You're going to press this button. You're going to say this line, pause for this many seconds, look over here, because you have to play it just so in order for that joke to land. But then I saw another source that said after the movie came out, Peter Graves would go around making jokes about that he was a pedophile and stuff. So he clearly was comfortable leaning into it after the movie became a big hit.
It's weird how much to boil that whole joke down to him being a pedophile in his own mind is even, because it's like, it's not just that he's a pedophile, it's that he's this like sort of whimsical, like, it's the specific stuff that he's saying. And it's more just like making fun of this uncanny relationship that little boys and airline pilots or a army general or some guy they look up to in old movies have. That's kind of like, oh, there, little Billy, you want to come sit on my lap?
Yeah, you're right. Like, the concept of a kid going into a cockpit, it's a place of wonder. It's a place of magic. And he's showing, like, the captain is showing the little boy something magical and super fucking cool. And that is that is the energy he brings. It's like this energy of like acting like all these questions he's asking is full of wonder and joy and magic. And that's just so funny that you're right. If you deliver that line in a creepy way, it's not funny.
Yeah, and I do love when they talk about the math of needing to look at where he looks in order for the joke to be funny, because I have completely experienced this shit. There was this one, I know it's like the most boring thing whenever I listen back to me describing stuff that I've done in like theater or whatever, but I'm gonna say it anyways. I was in the show A Little Night Music. This character that I played, Henrik, he has this whole like freak out where he castigates all of the other characters because he's this repressed priest and everybody else is like fucking and shit, and he's like, you're all terrible. And I had this one line, after I get like too worked up, and I turned out to the side and I go, I despise you all. And it would only get a laugh if I looked in a certain angle. Like if I looked too directly, if I had my eyes pointed too directly outwards, it wouldn't get a laugh. But if I looked up in the sort of upper left quadrant, if my eyes were sort of drifting away from my face, it works. And these kind of math angle things about humor.
It's so interesting. And it's so cool that with theater, you can try a bunch of shit because you can do it slightly differently each night and get a better sense of what is and isn't funny. Whereas like TV and movies, it's like you're stuck with whatever you recorded. I guess you can.
I talk about this a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, because they started off as a theater troupe.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess you can like have the movie in previews or whatever. And if it's not getting a laugh, like they cut out a lot of jokes after showing it to a few audiences because they're like, we don't need all this dialogue. Let's just cut it down in post-production. And that's good because the movie is only an hour and 25 minutes, and yet it still felt a little long to me.
Well, we'll talk about the length in a bit later, because I do think there's, when you have things to so specifically compare it to like another movie that has the same dialogue and plot in it, you can really sort of pick out what's not working. But this thing of them honing their material through audience response, I do think, as they say, it makes the movie play a little weird at home, because there's these long periods of time sometimes where the movie is edited for a laugh to play out, and a character's just kind of sitting there staring, and it makes the movie feel a little slower when it's not filled with laughter.
Right, because they said they noticed playing it in an audience, people would be laughing out loud so much that then they would miss the jokes that happened immediately after because people would be laughing too loudly. And so, like you said, then they'd be extending scenes to allow enough time for laughter. And I bet that is totally different watching it in audience. And also, like, just in general, watching a comedy surrounded by other people who are laughing is a much more rewarding experience. So it is not the same watching it at home, just the two of us who, like, it's not really our brand of humor to begin with.
This movie is like dad jokes and puns, right? Which is not our thing.
And as you had said, I think if we watched Airplane before watching 0 Hour in Airport 1975, it would have been better. We would have been a little fresher and less already tired of the airplane disaster movie structure.
It's a boring structure in the first place because everybody's sitting. It's all these static shots. You can see the appeal of wanting to make one of these movies, because you can tell that they could probably shoot it out pretty quick, because you just have these set of setups. Everybody's in one seat to shoot every Gloria Swanson scene until she's done, and she's just been sitting down the whole time, and you don't even have to do like a second setup. But it gets so boring, and the long period of time where the one character's having to get talked to from by the air traffic guys, and they're scared. It's just so long and boring in every version of it.
Yeah, the limited space of an airplane and the fact that the passengers all have to sit so much, it really is not a good setting for a film, in my opinion. Do you have any movies that are entirely set on airplanes that you like? Snakes on a Plane, Red Eye, what else is there? Con Air, Air Force One, Nonstop. Do you like any of those?
I don't dislike Con Air. I like Red Eye. I feel like Red Eye is the only one of those movies that is a true one of these movies. Because Con Air and Air Force One, they have a fair amount of action. Flight Plan, that they sort of get out and have people crawling around places and have a lot more action. Red Eye, that is a movie that's like people sitting down. I mean, I'm sure somebody goes to the bathroom at one point in Red Eye, but it's like, that's a people sitting down, making phone calls thriller that I think is pretty taut.
Yeah, it was like a fun little mid-sized movie. I liked it.
But I'll tell you what these movies would be really bad for is watching on an airplane, because it'd be so boring. I do think that this movie holds up for a lot of people. It doesn't hold up really for us, but I do think there's a lot of audiences that could watch this with fresh eyes, and they still seem to think it's very funny, because I do think that the movie is kind of honed in a way that feels like they know that it works. And nobody's trying to be funny, and that's very helpful. You're not having somebody make a joke that falls flat to a modern audience. But I think that there's something about the fact that these people were theater comedians, and something that they know about how audience reactions work. This is what buoys Airplane. And even me watching jokes not work, I still feel the power of that joke.
In terms of stuff not aging well, David Zucker had said there was talk at Paramount of withholding the film's 40th anniversary release over feared backlash for scenes that today would be deemed insensitive. And specifically, what they were referring to is the jive talk scene. The scene where two black guys on the plane are talking to each other in jive, then there's translation that comes up on the screen. The ZAZ team didn't write the jive talk scene. They just had some filler nonsense stuff written in the script that didn't make any sense. And the actors Al White and Norm Gibbs, who are the actors who did the scene, they wrote their own dialogue and they did their own research into jive, which is not actually a language. It's slang. So they were like, okay, we'll try our best to like make it into a language. But yeah, what do you think about that sequence holding up and aging?
I think the central thing that makes that feel dated and be dated, even regardless of whether it feels more problematic, is that people don't call African American vernacular English jive. And in fact, we've sort of gone through several different cycles of trying to call it different things like ebonics. But yeah, now it's just permeated into the culture. So it's a little bit alien to think about this being such an impenetrably different dialect. Which I also think is funny to think about. Like, they originally saw Shaft, and the ZAZ-ed, and they were like, we can't understand what anybody in this is saying. And I just feel like if you watch Shaft, it's not very difficult for me to understand what they're saying. And I just feel like these guys were very sheltered, shall we say. I mean, they were Midwestern,
Yeah, the idea that the concept of this joke coming from them not understanding the dialogue in Shaft is so lame to me, and is like, okay. Jim Abrams said he remembers going to see Airplane anonymously in a black neighborhood, and he was really nervous about how it would come off. But the audience loved it, and he said to himself, maybe this isn't merely a joke about jive talking and stupid white guy subtitles. Perhaps inadvertently we wrote a joke acknowledging the tone deafness of white America to the whole 400 years of the African American experience. And so it's funny that he's like, I think we accidentally wrote something that is meaningful in a certain way, which is funny to me. And David Zucker says that he points out that half the jokes in that gag are aimed at the white people, which is probably why the joke holds up okay.
Part of the joke of the subtitles is how prim and proper the subtitles are. But then the other joke is like a white lady understands it perfectly, and it's the funniest person that you can imagine to speak this language, and like she studied it or something. But then there's this extra weird scene that happens where she's condescending to them, and they're like, "What? Like we're not idiots?" And she's like, "I'm sorry, I'm just relating with this guy said." It's very multi-layered in a strange way.
Yeah. The condescending thing is like when the stewardess says something back to them, and then the old white lady is translating for them. They're like, "We understand her. Like, why are you acting like we can't? Like, like." And I think that is a good addition to that. It does just make it super layered. So I think the Jive Talk scene holds up well, and it's interesting.
I bet it was already I bet this was already past any person seriously calling this talking jive, or do you know what I mean? Like I bet 1980 was probably a little bit late for them to say this. Saying jive it sounds so 70s. I think that's the main joke that people are imagining won't hold up.
One thing that I felt didn't hold up well for me, but then actually when I learned more about the genesis of these jokes, actually was more complicated than I thought it was, is in the control room, there is a flamboyantly gay character. And his jokes seem to be based on the fact that he's gay. And that seems to be like what the joke usually is. And I felt like a bad taste in my mouth watching his jokes. And so, Sam, I want your reaction to those jokes while you were watching it, but then we can talk a bit more about why those jokes came about.
And I can clearly tell that I had the same reaction as you, which is like it felt incredibly weird and poor taste. But then finding out about who this guy was kind of turned me around on them. And the more that I think about them, I'm actually liking those jokes more. And this is just so stupid and true about humor. Just like, it's just so annoying how sometimes you can be like, oh, that person was gay? Oh, I guess that is funny. I guess I have permission to find it funny. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah, because the story behind all of this is the actor who did those jokes, his name is Steven Stucker. And when Zaz first moved to LA to start the Kentucky Fried Theater, they'd already had like a theater group back in Milwaukee where they were from, and there was a piano player who was part of the troupe, and they were losing him. So they needed to find a replacement piano player who was also funny. And somebody recommended Steven Stucker, who showed up, and he was wearing these leather hot pants, and he was just very flamboyant. And the Zaz guys were like, oh, this isn't what we had in mind. They had actually never met an openly gay person at that point because they were from Milwaukee. And so them moving to LA, like this was culture shock for them. And their style of humor is to play everything straight. So to have this like flamboyant gay guy, like that's like part of his humor, that's not what they wanted, but they decided to give him a try, and he always got a lot of laughs in doing the Kentucky Fried Theater. So that really just changed their perspective about a lot of things and made them more open to that style of humor. And so all of those jokes in Airplane, they are written by Steven Stucker, the actor himself. Like he's the one who came up with all of his lines. And they said that they wouldn't have had that character if it wasn't for Steven Stucker. So that does really change my interpretation of those jokes.
Yeah, especially like that he made them up. And his character actually is sort of the only person in the whole world who's making a joke. He's not quite, because he is still sort of taking things seriously, but he just has this goofy grin on his face and this like Randy wink, like when and Leon's getting larger. I don't know why I now kind of find that joke funny, but it's like he has a weird awareness compared to the rest of the characters, and that only plays for me knowing that he is the one making, like he's riffing.
Yeah, it's so weird. Context is so interesting.
Well, yeah, and just knowing that this isn't a person's idea of a gay person that they're playing.
Right, because like it really felt watching it like, oh, the joke is that he's gay, and that's not actually what the joke was.
He's got a unique sensibility.
He's just this genuinely outrageous person. Okay, what other jokes? Don't Call Me Shirley. It's a classic. It's just really funny. It just is. Did I laugh when I saw it? No, I didn't. I've never laughed at that joke, but it is funny.
So I actually think I want to zoom in on. I think the cockpit is the best part of the movie. Like the cockpit sequence for me, every single part of it works. By the cockpit, I mean the cockpit before everything goes wrong. Like Kareem and the captain and the little boy. I just think it all kills. I really love Kareem in this. I think it's really funny. Like there's some I don't know why, but there's something about his understatedness. It feels very intentional. Like no part of Kareem feels like he's giving a bad performance. I know they said like they had to hold cue cards up for him. I feel like the way he said he's like, my name is Roger Murdoch. I'm an airline pilot. I just think that's really funny and feels very committed to this strange quest that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is clearly on to find himself through being an airline pilot in this movie. I don't know.
Okay, I don't know anything about basketball, so it's definitely not like historical moments in sports. So I'm sure that people who know about sports could have a very insightful addition to like explaining, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's relevance and culture at the time. But from what I understand, the Lakers, the team he was on, had just won the championship, and he was the MVP of that team. So he was, well known at the time. It was a big moment for him. And I think he said in the oral history that he felt like he kind of needed to give a better impression of himself to the general public. Like maybe he came off as kind of an asshole. I don't know.
No, yeah, I mean, he was a person who famously struggled with being misunderstood, I think, for a lot of his career. But yeah, Kareem was trying to make his persona be a little bit like he was both trying to play with his persona. Like I think him being a dick to this kid is supposed to be a joke about how he's perceived, but then it's also showing that he's not too self-serious. This movie might be something that he's the most famous for.
One anecdote that I liked about him, two actually. One is that he only agreed to do it for $35,000 because he like really wanted to buy this Oriental rug. He just had this really expensive rug he wanted, and the guys thought that the agent was kind of just using that as a weird like leverage point, and they were lying about him wanting to buy this rug. But then after he got cast, he was showing off his rug, and they're like, "Oh no, I guess he just." Does really want this rug. But also there's this part where after he gets food poisoning, one of the stewardesses, she has to like drag him down the aisle. And I think this really illustrates how the ZAZ team didn't know really anything about filmmaking. They had made Kentucky Fried Movie prior to this, but they weren't directors. They were just the writers of that. And so this was their first time directing. And they were just like, okay, yeah, you, actress, just go ahead and drag Kareem Abdul-Jabbar down the aisleway. And she was like, I'm trying here, but I can't move him an inch. And so they built a platform on wheels so that she could drag him on the platform. And she's like, I still can't do it. And so they had to have people in the aisle helping push the platform down. And it's just a funny little look into the Zaz guys, like not being aware of filmmaking and things you have to prep for.
You can't drag a 7-foot man?
Yeah, do you think I could drag you?
You want to try?
Okay, we're gonna try this right now. Okay. That was a disaster. I just injured Sam.
Not injured.
But you were like, ow, this really hurts.
You gave me a rug burn. I shouldn't have done it without a shirt on. I'm in my underwear and no shirt right now, by the way. It's very hot in our apartment.
That didn't work. So Sam is 5'11 3/4, tall person. I am 5'4". I did not move Sam an inch. That was, I guess maybe an inch enough to give them rug burn, but it didn't work. So I'm sorry for hurting you, Sam.
There's a joke in this movie where Leslie Nielsen is lying and his nose starts growing like Pinocchio. Do you think that was funny?
No.
Like, that's not funny at all.
Let's stop talking about the things that aren't funny, because it's not interesting to hear us say, like, oh, that's just not funny. What did you think was funny? Because I'll tell you one that I thought was funny. I thought it was funny when they're looking at the magazine rack and there's, like, that whole section that's just, like, whacking material. And then on top of that joke, there's, like, a joke about, I don't know, sperm life or something. I thought that was funny. I like the autopilot being a blow-up guy. I like the idea of, like, thinking the autopilot is, like, an actual blow-up thing.
It takes it to an interesting, different dimension, just having this physicalization of another character that's a different kind of a thing. I like the existence of Otto. I like Boy's Life, Nun's Life. This movie really highlight, and not just this, but this is also in the other films, too, in Airport 75. In the Obsession episode, Brian De Palma's Obsession, I talk about how movies are missing these extra frills of background people like break dancers or nuns and Boy Scouts was sort of my central thesis. And this movie posits a nuns and Boy Scouts dichotomy. And this movie has plenty of tropey kind of people. It's got Hare Krishnas in it. There's no kinds of person now except influencers. Like, influencers are the one kind of person that can populate the background of a movie now, and it's just so boring. Where are the people who decide to put on a specific kind of outfit? We need more of those maybe in society, and then we can have them back in movies.
The flashbacks,
I hate the flashbacks.
The only thing that I think's funny surrounding the flashbacks is once the flashbacks are over, the people next to him committed suicide because they're bored to death. And I think that's funny only because I was also bored by the flashbacks. It's funny because I genuinely think the flashback scenes are boring. We should mention one of the flashback scenes is a big Saturday Night Fever parody, which, we just did that episode. So that's, I don't have anything to say about that other than the fact that, it parodied Saturday Night Fever. Except I will say that they sped up the Bee Gees music, and the Bee Gees were fine with that because they're like, we're just happy to have our stuff in a movie again since we've been getting so much hate recently.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, this is already like the joke of this movie is, remember back in the day when we were into disco. It's a flashback to their early part of their relationship, so it's already making the joke, wasn't disco crazy back in those days? I do think it's funny when he throws his jacket away and is in the pose and the jacket comes back and hit him. I think that's a funny idea. I will say, sorry, just to talk about the flashbacks. Airplane, I was bored in all these movies. Airplane bored me the most of any of them. I'm sorry to go back and criticizing it, but the flashbacks really, I think, are what did it. Because the flashbacks are very long. Like, even though they sped up that Saturday Night Fever song, that whole flashback still takes quite a long time. And I'm sorry, but I just don't think people dancing is funny.
Yeah, in the oral history book, they make such a big deal about, like, one of the really important things about Airplane is that you are actually invested in the romantic relationship, and that you care about the plane being landed safely. And like, I am kind of invested in both of those things, but the flashbacks, I feel like they put them in to try and build up the romance a bit more, but I agree, they're way too long, not funny enough. They just have, like, each one has a concept, and then they just write that concept out, but it's not funny.
And they're trying to break up the visual monotony of just sitting in the plane all the time, but then they cut to something more boring than the plane.
Can I just say, I've learned through watching 0 Hour and Airport 1975 and Airplane that I don't like airplane disaster movies, but I do love disaster movies in general. So this is a recent discovery about myself. I just watched Poseidon Adventure. I thought it was great. I love things like Cloverfield. I love Titanic. I love that shit. I love Day After Tomorrow. It is really fun, in my opinion, watching disaster happen. But I think I prefer if it's happening on land because I like to see people crawling over crumbling buildings or having some sort of obstacle in a setting you don't normally see that obstacle in. That's something I like about disaster films. And an airplane disaster film, again, it's just too limited with the space and the way people can move.
Yeah, I think this is a bad genre. I think it's crazy how ran into the ground it got in the 70s with all the airport sequels, but they were just like huge hits. And a lot of it had to do with all the big thread with the 70s disaster hits were kind of showcasing all these new technologies going wrong. It's always somebody making a brand new kind of ship or building or airplane or something. It's just like, oh, it's like Titanic. And it's like, oh, this is so perfect. Nothing bad could ever happen here. And so I think a lot of the novelty of the time that people had of just seeing this thing on film that they'd never seen before, I think that's completely lost. And I think that's why most people rightly view those airport movies as terrible. They have no cultural footprint.
I feel like I'm kind of running out of stuff for Airplane. It's just hard to talk about comedies a little bit.
It's hard to talk about comedies, but I do want to just, again, I know that we did this last time with Young Frankenstein, but like, let's try and figure out who these hosts that you're listening to are, what sort of comedy experiences we've had, because this movie Airplane was just we in this oral history you hear tons of people talk about what a seminal thing it was for them watching this as a kid. And Trey Parker talks about this. He says this was the Star Wars of comedy. This was the comedy movie that kids went to over and over and over again, and that sort of changed the way people related to each other and what they talked about. For me, The experience that I had that was like this was Wet Hot American Summer. And I do think that that's a movie that has a lot in common with Airplane in that it gets more and more ridiculous as the film goes on. I think that Airplane runs out of steam in a certain way where Wet Hot really does build to a crescendo towards the end. But just that experience of watching something and it's just I can't believe how fucking funny I'm finding this. I did not know that things could be this funny. Do you have any experiences that you really are like that with comedy movies, like in your life, Elena?
This is the part of the episode where we all make fun of Elena having no sense of humor.
I'm not trying to make fun of you. It's just, yeah.
No. The answer is no. Like, I remember growing up laughing a lot with my siblings at Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Like, we would repeat the lines over and over again and laugh so hard doing the lines. But at a certain point, I realized I actually don't think it's funny. Like, I repeated all the lines and stuff because my family did, and it was fun to make jokes with them. Or maybe I thought it was funny when I was a kid and then I grew out of it. I don't know. That's a memory of me thinking something was really funny or laughing or quoting it a lot, but I don't actually enjoy it that much anymore. I remember thinking Mean Girls was hilarious, and I still do. I think Mean Girls is a fucking masterpiece, and we'd quote that all the time when I was in high school. So maybe Mean Girls is the answer for me.
Anchorman was another big one. How about that?
No, I don't like stupid humor.
So would you say Airplane is stupid?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it is. Like I'm kind of with you at this point. Like I'm not a person who thinks a lot of stuff is that funny. I don't seek out comedy much more than you do nowadays, even though again, I'm not trying to cast you as this person who doesn't get humor or whatever, because like I think I'm more like that now. I think we're very similar as far as how much we like to watch stuff that's potentially going to make us laugh. Maybe you watch more like TikTok humor and stuff, or like I used to be more at a comedy podcast, but now I'm more like podcasts with comedians that are about something else. I don't really like Comedy Bang Bang that much anymore, or anything that's like trying to be funny. Funniness feels weird to me in general now.
I have never liked somebody being like, I'm going to tell you jokes. I've never liked stand up. I don't like the situation where I'm supposed to be listening to jokes and then I'm laughing. I want the comedy to come organically from a situation. And maybe that's because the funniest moments in my life have been from something happening when I'm with my friends and then we're all dying of laughter, not because anybody made a joke, but just because something just happened to happen in a way that was very ironic or whatever. I don't know. I don't have any examples, but that's situational humor. That's why I love like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because the jokes are more based on that than just like, oh, I'm going to tell a joke right now.
There's plenty of characters making jokes in Buffy.
And I'm usually not laughing at that part.
Fair enough.
Okay, so Airplane, it was a huge hit, got a lot of money. It was Paramount's most profitable film at the time. Got a Golden Globe nomination for Best Picture in the musical or comedy category. Critically well regarded. Pauline Kael just gave it a lukewarm review. She said, Airplane is tearfully clunky and there are laughs in it, but it's so forgettable that the morning after I'd been to it, when I read a rave review, my first thought was, oh, I've got to see that. And that's funny to me because she's wrong about it being forgettable. I don't love this movie, but it's definitely not forgettable. It stayed in the public consciousness for a long time, and it was hugely influential on a lot of comedians and a lot of comedy styles,
including people like Mel Brooks, who was already moving more away from satire, which this movie has zero satire in it. Again, we don't need to go back and define parody. I would say that the jive talking scene is the closest thing to a sort of satirical point that's ever being made in the movie, but this is a spoof.
Yeah, ZAZ said at the time they felt that people were just like really tired of the anti-war movement just as much as they were tired of the war. So they decided to just do parodies of movies instead because it's more light. But they said that they sometimes slipped into satire. And the example they gave is so funny to me because I don't consider this satire. But somebody on the plane asks when the plane will land. The pilot says, I can't tell. And the doctor says, you can tell me, I'm a doctor. And they said that's inadvertently satirizing the arrogance of doctors. That I don't think counts as satire. I don't even get it that much.
Well, I guess, yeah, to break that down, they're just trying to make another joke where he's taking something literally, like it's a big building with patience, but that's not important right now. But you could argue that it's inadvertently slipping into a trope about doctors, like a doctor joke.
Like, you can tell me anything because I'm smart enough that I can handle anything.
Yeah, I guess. This is very strange. I do appreciate how much these guys think about their humor. We did Mel Brooks, and I read his autobiography, and every insight that he has into why comedy works or why he made a certain joke have a certain rhythm it's just, and I thought Gene Hackman needed to say something extremely funny to button the scene, and I thought, why not have him say, I was going to make espresso? I just thought it was hilarious, and it was the perfect ending to that scene. It's like, that's the full insight. But these guys can actually kind of break down why their humor is working, because they talk about getting really into, in Kentucky Fried Theater, honing their style, and they just became obsessed with trying to figure out what works within their palette and what is outside of that. And it's appealingly nerdy, I have to say. They seem like they actually thought about this more than Mel Brooks, who just kind of is of this lineage of Catskills humor and wisecracks, and it's more about rhythm. And these guys are about formula.
They have this like list, the 15 rules of comedy. It's their own personal rules of what they found works and doesn't work. We can go through a couple of them. So number 1, joke on a joke.
Also known as hat on a hat.
2 jokes at the same time cancel each other out. When an actor delivers a punchline, it should be done seriously. It dilutes the comedy to try and be funny on top of it. So just let the joke speak for itself. Acknowledgement. Actors in the foreground must ignore the jokes happening behind them.
I guess this is kind of boring. I don't know. The ones that are interesting are like number 5, trivia, which is a joke using references so arcane that few people will ever get it. This is a sort of anti-Woody Allen joke, right? Or anti-Woody Allen rule.
Yeah, Weird Al Yankovic said in that oral history of Airplane that he learned from Airplane that one of the golden rules of parody is that it has to be funny even if you haven't seen the material that the parody is referencing. I think that does work well for Airplane. You don't need to have seen 0 Hour, and the vast majority of people have not seen it.
It hurts it if you've seen it. And Weird Al is actually an interesting person to bring up because he's talked about how, he's not really doing parody anymore because of the death of the monoculture. Gone are the days when Weird Al can just say, okay, Smells Like Teen Spirit. That's the song to parody right now because that's what's happening right now. There's just not really an obvious central thing happening in culture other than like Trump, which isn't funny at all. Everybody has their own music they're listening to, their own movies they're watching. Scary Movie came out, and the bit of Scary Movie was just, you have all seen these scenes in these movies, even if you haven't seen the movies, because they're mostly parodying like trailer moments in movies. We don't even have trailer moments that everybody has seen nowadays. So the concept of parody itself, this new Naked Gun movie, will be an interesting test, I think, to see how that works.
All right, other rules that I think are interesting. There's one, they say axe grinding. When the joke is overshadowed by some message, it gets unfunny fast. So this is them basically having a rule like, we don't do satire. We don't have political messages.
Or like meaning at all.
Yeah, which is, I don't agree that that it automatically makes something unfunny, but whatever.
This is their style.
One of their rules, they say conceptual jokes are fine, but people don't laugh at concepts. They laugh at verbal or visual punchlines. And the example they give is the joke where the soldier is waving goodbye to his girlfriend while he's like on the plane. And the joke is making it seem like, a goodbye scene that you would see if a soldier's getting on a train, but instead it's on a plane. And personally, I don't think that joke's that funny. But their example is that it's not just funny to suggest oh, it's a plane instead of a train. They found that the funny part isn't until she starts running and then there's the visual gag of her slamming her face into the poles that are up, that are like train station poles. And then that's the funny part because people like a physical gag. And I personally don't go for physical gags that much. At one of them, they have hanging on. Don't play a joke too long. When it's reached its peak, get the scissors. And I think they are good at that. They don't have jokes overstay their welcome, which is good. And their 15th rule is there are no rules.
Whoa.
All right. What are the new Hollywood aspects of Airplane? I would would say it is. A lot of people say that for the time it was very edgy and sexual. And it's weird thinking about it that way because Julie Haggerty, who plays the stewardess, or I guess I should say flight attendant, to be more politically correct, she
Very helpful.
Sigourney Weaver read for that role, but she didn't like how sexual the role was. She specifically didn't like the joke, "I'll sit on your face and wriggle." But Julie Haggerty had said that she felt the Zaz guys had an innocence to them, and even the dirty jokes felt pure. And I kind of agree with that. To me, even the sex jokes, they feel like they're written by virgins.
Yeah, I know what you mean. As we said, I like the boobs coming up randomly in a moment of chaos. I like the way that sexuality is deployed. It's interesting because I was talking about this movie with various people who were around at the time and trying to get what they thought about it. And I talked about it with my other partner's parents, who were very cool people. And weirdly, my partner's dad said, I don't actually think I've ever sat down and watched that movie all the way through. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah. He was like, when did that come out? And I said 1980. And he said, oh yeah, that's like, no, I think at the time that would have been more seen as like corny to me. And I was like, really? He was like, yeah, no, I was more like Blues Brothers and that kind of stuff. I was like, right. Post SNL, Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, who pointedly again were not in this movie. That is what he thought was cool humor in those movies. This is just so strange that he perceived that in this, which again, I do think this movie kind of is corny. Like it's having all these old actors from 20 years ago.
So other things that I think are new Hollywoody, and it's playing off of things that were happening in the 70s at the time, like disaster films. But I don't think of the 70s disaster films as very new Hollywoody. That just happened to happen in the 70s. Parodies in comedy, like comedy in general, new Hollywood comedies, it's like its whole separate thing than new Hollywood movies.
And this is a whole separate thing from everybody else.
But it is a parody film.
I mean, Zaz is a separate thing from other comedy too, I think.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, the other comedies of the 70s were also parody films. It was just the trend at the time within comedy.
And this is kind of the end of that, and this is the turning point of like parody, where everybody kind of goes to this form of parody from here on out until the end of parody, at the early 2000s.
The fact that it's a new type of humor, the concept of playing it straight, it's new Hollywood in the sense that new Hollywood was pushing the boundaries and trying new things. So I think that counts as a new Hollywood aspect. This movie parodies new Hollywood films like Jaws briefly. They said the reason they added it was because they felt like the audience didn't know in the beginning that they're watching a comedy, and so they're not approaching it correctly. And they needed a joke in the very beginning to kind of train the audience and prepare them for everything else that they're going to see. So when you see that Jaws airplane thing in the beginning, you're watching a comedy.
That's like a musical theater story of needing the right opening number. And Steven Spielberg had just attempted to do this same trick with 1941 1 year earlier, and he started it off with a Jaws parody of himself, which is extra cringy. But
there is actually one actor in this movie that we've seen before. You know that?
No.
He has a very small role. He's in the controller room. It's Jonathan Banks, who plays Mike in Breaking Bad, but we've seen him in another small role in Coming Home. So that was kind of fun to realize that's the only one we've seen before in a different episode.
Yeah, I saw that he was in this movie, but I had no idea who he was.
Okay, so that's Airplane. Let's do the Cold Stone rating, I guess.
Yes, this is where we rate things like Cold Stone sizes. We say, do you like the movie, love the movie, or gotta have the movie? Or does the movie not make the Cold Stone scale? And did you not like it at all? So, Airplane, do you like, love, or gotta have it?
Okay, I'm sorry, but it doesn't make my scale. And I think I was debating, do I say it's a like it or does it not make my scale? And the thing that tips it over to the not like it category for me is, as I mentioned before a number of times on this podcast, I have a phobia of people throwing up. And the whole plot, that is a central thing. You hear people throwing up, there's food poisoning. That is just makes me never want to put this movie on ever. So that really tips it into the not making the scale category for me. That being said, I do genuinely recognize this movie as a comedy classic, and I think everybody should watch it, but it is just not for me.
I kind of feel the opposite, and yet the same. I to me, it's sort of one of those obvious, it has to be a gotta have it scenarios. I don't really know why, because again, it's not like I'm judging it by anything about it that I appreciated while watching it. Like, I was very disappointed watching this movie, even though I had the whole thing in my head already. But right, like we said, it's like Shakespeare, where you talked about it being a thing where sometimes people talk about Shakespeare being cliche. I think that'd be such a funny thing for a teenager to say. But for me, it's more that thing of the lines in Shakespeare, you've heard them so many times, but when you hear them in context, they still have that same power because they're just constructed well. And the jokes in Airplane, whether or not I find them funny or not, I see their effectiveness. And a comedy classic, as you say, is quite revolutionary. I don't know, maybe this is a weird thing too, where I'm kind of, it's like, I almost feel like I've become such a person who doesn't find movies funny that I feel like I can't properly judge Airplane, but I know it's good because I still think it's pretty good, even though I found it really boring. Maybe it's just like that pregnancy or that giving birth thing where like after you give birth, women forget the pain. I remember that I didn't find it fun, but I still think I hold it in as high esteem as I ever did.
I'm sorry, I'm so confused. You spent the whole movie saying how unfunny you think it is and how many jokes you don't think works, and you're really gonna give it a gotta have it?
It just seems like this movie does play now. I actually think I bet this movie has aged really well for a lot of audiences because like dad jokes and puns are very in fashion now, and memes. It's got that kind of meme energy. This is all stuff that I don't like, but would be a fool to claim is bad. And I guess I'm calling you a fool, Elena, but,
I have been treating the scale as more of a personal scale than you have. Although occasionally I will make exceptions if I know something just is too big of a place in culture. And that is where my caveat came from, where I said it doesn't make my scale, but I do think it's a classic that everybody should watch. But yeah, it's still not enough to push it from me, even on my scale. I feel like you're not being totally honest with yourself by saying it's a gotta have it.
No. I told you exactly how I feel about it. But no, you just said you think everybody should watch it. That to me makes me feel you're not being completely honest with yourself when you say it doesn't make the scale. Because like we both agree, like everybody should watch this. I don't think everybody should watch Saturday Night Fever at all. We just gave that a didn't make the scale. And I definitely don't think everybody needs to watch that movie at all.
Throughout this podcast, we're just going to keep on honing down exactly what the scale means to us in terms of being objective or personal. And for me today, I'm going to have a more personal rating.
Yeah, I believed you when you said that the throwing up thing was a main factor.
Yeah, I really was not looking forward to rewatching it for that. Okay. That concludes another exciting new Hollywood adventure. Thank you all so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Kill Your Idols on the podcatcher of your choice. Please leave us a rating or review. We would be very grateful. It is so helpful for small podcasts like ours. We'd love to hear from you, so please reach out to us on Instagram or send us an email to killyouridols@gmail.com. We want to say thank you to the Illuminator for our logo, and thank you to ourselves for everything else. Please join us next episode where we will be basking in Al Pacino's brilliance in Dog Day Afternoon. Attica! Attica!
Hey, Peter Fonda, how did we do?
We blew it.
Marlon Brando, Ellen Burstyn, Robert Evans, and Shelley Duvall. Sad endings 'cause of Watergate.